Hello children, I hope you are all healthy and safe. Welcome to this special English hour. Here we will sing, dance, listen to stories and have lots of fun together. Are you ready to have fun? Then please stand up and join me in a dance. बच्चों, टीवी के सामने खड़े हो जाइए और मेरे साथ एक डांस में जुड़ जाइए.
All these animals in the zoo, all day long, what do? Walk, talk, study, no, they dance. All these animals in the zoo, how do you think do the snakes dance? They wiggle. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle and wiggle. All these animals in the zoo, how do you think do the penguins dance? They waddle. Waddle, waddle, waddle and waddle. All these animals in the zoo, how do you think do the elephants dance? They sway. Sway, sway, sway and sway.
Children, now I would like to ask you a few questions. Let us share our thoughts and ideas. बच्चों, अब मैं आपसे कुछ सवाल पूछना चाहूंगी. Children, do you like listening to stories? क्या आपको कहानियां सुनना अच्छा लगता है? I'm sure most of you love listening to stories. Children, can you tell me who amongst your family members tells you stories? बच्चों, घर पर आपको कहानियां कौन सुनाता है? My mother told me beautiful stories. Every night she would tell me a story before I fell asleep. Children, usually in everyone's family, either the grandfather or the grandmother or one of the parents tells the children a story. Children, for years, grandmothers tell their children stories to educate them about the past and also help them learn good values. Children, do you know who are storytellers? Years ago and even today, in different villages and cities of India, there are storytellers. Not just in India, even in other countries, there are people called storytellers. What do these storytellers do? Storytellers tell people stories. They educate people about their past, the history of that place, and also teach people moral values. Storytellers सालों पहले थे और आज भी हैं. ये लोगों को कहानियों के द्वारा उन्हें कई सारी जानकारी देते हैं. वो लोगों को अच्छी बातें भी सिखाते हैं. Children, I get very fascinated listening to stories from storytellers. This was one of the most important ways of educating people about their past, about their culture, and teaching them good values. Children, would you like to know more about storytellers? Then come, let's read a story together. Children, while learning a language, it is very important that we keep learning new words. Now, I would like to share with you a few new words. Please listen to me carefully and note them down in your notebook. We will come across these words in the lesson we'll be reading today. बच्चों, अब मैं आपको कुछ शब्द बताने वाली हूँ. इन्हें गौर से सुने और अपनी नोटबुक में नोट करें. The first word is grain. 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 The second word is sparrows. 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 The third word is storyteller. 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 The fourth word is palace. 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 Next word is thought. 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 Children, we will be reading a very interesting lesson today. The title of the lesson is A Never-Ending Story. If you have a textbook, please open to page number 82 and point to the words as I read. If you don't have a textbook, please see your TV screens and listen to me carefully. बच्चों, अब हम ये लेसन पढ़ेंगे. A Never-Ending Story. अगर आपके पास टेक्स्ट है तो प्लीज पेज नंबर 82 पर उसे खोलें और कुछ इस तरीके से अपनी उंगली शब्दों पर रखें जब मैं उन्हें पढ़ रही हूँ. अगर आपके पास टेक्स्ट बुक नहीं है तो आप प्लीज टीवी स्क्रीन की ओर देखें और मेरी आवाज गौर से सुनें. A never-ending story. Once there was a king. He loved stories. Tell me a story, he said all the time. At the end of the story, he said, and then what happened next? Nothing. This is the end, said the storyteller. Tell me a story that has no end. I want a never-ending story. The storyteller thought and thought. All his stories had an end. Children, what is this story? A never-ending story about? This story is about a big king. The king lived in his palace. He loved listening to stories, and every time he would ask, and then what happens next? Even after the story had ended, the king would keep asking, and then next, what happened? He wanted to hear a never-ending story, a story that had no end. So, the storytellers that came to the palace kept wondering, which story should I tell the king? Because all the stories have an end. एक बड़े से राजा थे. उन्हें कहानियां सुनना बहुत अच्छा लगता था. उन्हें खास करके ऐसी कहानी सुननी थी जिसका कोई अंत ही ना हो. कहानी कहने वाला यानी स्टोरी टेलर भी सोच में पड़ गया कि मैं ऐसी कहानी कहां से लाऊं जिसका कोई अंत ही नहीं. He could not think of a never-ending story. Then he had a bright idea. He began to tell a new story. Once there was a king. He lived in a big palace. The palace had a big kitchen and a big storehouse. There were big heaps of grain in the storehouse. There was a hole in the wall of the storehouse. The storyteller then had an idea. He started a new story. He told the king, Once upon a time, there was a big palace. In the big palace, there was a big kitchen. In the kitchen, there was a big storehouse. And in the storehouse, there was a hole in the wall. And do you know what was stored in the storehouse? There were big heaps of grains stored in the storehouse. One day, a sparrow saw the hole in the wall and flew inside the storehouse. The sparrow took one grain from the storehouse and went out of the hole. The king asked, "Oh, what happened next?" The storyteller said, "Then another sparrow came in from the hole, took one grain and flew out." The king asked the same question. "Oh, then what happened?" A little sparrow saw the hole and swiftly flew inside the storehouse. Then she picked up a grain and flew away. "What happened next?" said the king. Then another sparrow saw the hole, flew in, picked a grain and flew away. "Oh, and then what happened next?" Then a third sparrow saw the hole, flew in, picked a grain and flew away. And then a fourth sparrow saw the hole. The story went on and on like this. Even now, the storyteller is telling the king this story about the grains and the sparrows. If you don't believe me, you can go there and see for yourself. The king kept asking the same question every time. "Oh, what happens next?" And the storyteller kept repeating the same statement. Then another sparrow entered from the hole, took a grain and flew out. The story continued and never had an end. So children, what happens in this story? In this story, there is a big and mighty king who lives in a big palace. He loves listening to stories. One day, the storyteller was narrating his story when the king kept asking, "And then what happens next?" One by one, the storyteller kept answering him. But finally, the story had to end somewhere. The king tells the storyteller, "I want to hear a never-ending story." The storyteller also started thinking, "All my stories have an end. Where do I bring a never-ending story from?" Then the storyteller gets an idea. He tells the king a story. He tells him a new story. He tells him that one day there was a big palace. In the palace, there was a big storehouse in which lots of grains were stored. Sparrows came one by one from a hole in the wall of the storehouse and kept picking up one grain and leaving. Every time the king asked, "And what happens next?" the storyteller keeps repeating the same thing. Another sparrow came in, picked a grain and flew away. Children, this is how the storyteller continued his story. I hope you enjoyed listening to this story. बच्चों, आशा है आपको ये कहानी पसंद आई। इस कहानी में एक बड़े से राजा थे जो अपने सुंदर से महल में रहते थे। उन्हें कहानियां सुनना बहुत पसंद था। राजा ने कहा, "मुझे ऐसी कहानी सुननी है जिसका कोई अंत ही ना हो।" तो कहानी कहने वाला भी सोच में पड़ गया कि सारी कहानियों का कोई न कोई अंत होता है। अब मैं ऐसी कहानी कहां से लाऊं जिसका कोई अंत ही नहीं? फिर भी कहानी कहने वाला कोशिश करता है और वो एक नई कहानी शुरू करता है। कहानी कहने वाला राजा से कहता है, एक दिन एक बड़े से महल में एक रसोई घर था। रसोई घर के अंदर एक गोदाम था। गोदाम में बहुत सारे दाने भरकर रखे थे। गोदाम की एक दीवार में एक छोटा सा छेद था। उस छेद में से एक चिड़िया आती, दाना लेती और चली जाती। हर बार राजा जब पूछते फिर क्या होता है, कहानी कहने वाला यही बात दोहराता रहता है कि एक चिड़िया आती है, दाना लेती है और चली जाती है। इस कहानी का कोई अंत नहीं होता और राजा इस कहानी को सुनते रहते हैं। Children, I hope you enjoyed this story and noticed how smart the storyteller was. Children, we came across lots of new words today. Let's try to understand their meaning and frame simple sentences using these words. आइए बच्चों, हमने आज जो नए शब्द सीखे उनके मतलब समझें और उन्हें इस्तेमाल करके एक वाक्य बनाएं। The first word is grains. 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 Rice, wheat are examples of grains. I went to the market to buy grains. Next word, sparrow. 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 It is a kind of bird. The sparrow comes every evening to eat grains. Next word, storyteller. 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 One who tells stories. I want to be a storyteller. Next word, palace. Palace. Palace means a big and beautiful home, usually where kings and queens live. The palace was big and beautiful. Next word, thought. 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 Something that comes to our mind. I had a thought of going back home. Children, I hope you liked this exercise of learning new words. Children, let's do an activity now. In this activity, let's try to go through the lesson once again and look for words which have two parts. That means the words individually also mean something and together they form a bigger word. Let me give you one example. The word is businessman. These are two separate words, business and man, but together they form a new and a bigger word, that is businessman. बच्चों, अब हम एक एक्टिविटी करेंगे। इस एक्टिविटी में आपको इस लेसन को वापस एक बार देखना है और इनमें आपको जहां पर भी ऐसे शब्द मिलते हैं जो दो अलग शब्द हैं लेकिन उन्हें एक साथ डाला गया है और एक बड़ा और नया शब्द बनता है, तो आपको उसे अंडरलाइन करना है। So children, would you like to give this a try? Then come, let's begin. Children, I hope you were able to find such words. Come, let me show you these words in the textbook. Story teller. Storyteller. Never ending. Never ending. Store, house, storehouse. So children, these are words that are formed by bringing two words together. Children, let's do an interesting activity now. We just read the lesson, A Never-Ending Story. In this story, there was no end to the story that the storyteller was telling the king. Children, would you like to think of an end for this story? Of the sparrows and the grains? Then come, let's give it a try. बच्चों, हमने अभी जो पाठ पढ़ा, उस पाठ में जो कहानी कहने वाला राजा से कहता है, उस कहानी का कोई अंत नहीं होता। ये कहानी चिड़िया और दानों के बारे में है। क्या आप इस कहानी का कोई अंत सोच सकते हैं? तो आइए साथ में मिलकर एक अच्छा सा अंत इस कहानी के लिए सोचते हैं। Children, I hope you were able to think of a beautiful end for this story. Come, let me tell you about the end I was able to think of. We can end this story by saying, when the king realized this, he closed the hole in the wall and then built a separate grain room especially for the sparrows. Then the sparrows started picking up grains from the special grain room made for them. Then the sparrows and the king became very happy. इस कहानी के अंत में राजा को जब पता चलता है कि चिड़िया दीवार के एक छेद से अंदर आकर दाना ले जाती है, वो उस दीवार के छेद को बंद करवा देते हैं, लेकिन वो खास चिड़िया के लिए एक अलग सा रूम बनाते हैं जिसमें वो दाने रखते हैं। चिड़िया आती है और वहां से दाना ले जाती है। चिड़िया और राजा दोनों खुश होते हैं। Children, I hope you all enjoyed today's session. Children, today we heard two stories. One was A Never-Ending Story and the second was A City of Stories. Children, please share these stories with your friends and family. Children, till we meet next time, please take care. Bye-bye and stay safe.